August 1951. A small town in the south of France called Pont-Saint-Esprit. 5,000 people. One bakery at the centre of everything. On a warm Thursday evening, the people of this town ate dinner. Bread, mostly. As they had every night of their lives. By midnight, the town had gone mad. A man was certain his body was made of fire and threw himself from a third-story window to put himself out. A woman fought snakes that were crawling up the inside of her own walls. A boy tried to strangle his grandmother because, in front of his eyes, she had turned into a demon. Dozens were dragged away in straitjackets. Several people died. And the official explanation for what happened that night would change 3 separate times. Pont-Saint-Esprit sits on the RH9 river in the Gard department of southern France. Its name means the Bridge of the Holy Spirit. A medieval bridge had spanned the river there for 700 years. In 1951, it was an ordinary working town. Farmers, river workers, shopkeepers, families. The kind of place where everyone bought their bread from the same few bakers, and where everyone trusted that bread completely. That trust is the whole case. At the centre of the town was a bakery run by a baker named Roch-Briand. His shop supplied flour and loaves to families across the town and to outlying farms in the surrounding countryside. On the afternoon of the 16th of August, 1951, the people of Pont-Saint-Esprit went about their business. They worked. They closed their shutters against the heat. In the evening, they sat down to eat. Within hours, the local doctors would receive the first calls. By the next day, those doctors would be writing one another notes using a word no physician ever wants to write. Epidemic. But epidemics spread person to person. This one did not. This one struck everyone at once. Whole families in the same hour. In the same houses. The only thing they had in common, the only thread that ran through every single victim, was what they had eaten for dinner. The first symptoms did not look like madness. They looked like the flu. People felt cold. Then unbearably hot. Their hands and feet went icy. Even in the August heat, they felt a crawling sensation under the skin, as if insects were moving just beneath the surface. Then came the stomach. Violent nausea, cramping, a taste of metal in the mouth that would not wash away with water or with wine. The local doctors, a man named Dr. Jeanvieux chief among them, began making house calls late on the night of the 16th. At first, they suspected food poisoning, bad meat, spoiled milk, something simple. But the patients did not get better. They got stranger. A woman told her doctor, very calmly, that her head was shrinking, that she could feel it pulling inward, like a fist closing. She asked him to please hold it in place, so it would not disappear entirely. A farmer became convinced that the floor of his house had turned to deep water, and that he was about to drown standing up. He climbed onto his table and would not come down. He stayed there for hours, and everywhere, in house after house, the same complaint, over and over, in the same words. There are animals. There are animals in the walls. By the early hours of the 17th of August, Pont-Saint-Esprit was no longer a town of sick people. It was a town of terror. The hallucinations turned violent. A man named, in the accounts that survive, simply the man who burned, became utterly certain that his body had caught fire from the inside. He could feel the flames, he said, climbing up his legs and into his chest. There was only one way to stop them. He ran to the window of his 3rd-floor room, tore the shutters open, and jumped. He survived the fall with both legs shattered, and when neighbours ran to help him, he screamed at them to leave him in the gutter. Because the gutter, he said, was the only thing cool enough to put out the fire. He was not the only one who jumped. Across the town, people fled their own homes into the streets to escape things only they could see. Some were chased by tigers, some by men with knives made of light, some by the dead. An 11-year-old boy looked at his grandmother across the kitchen and watched her face split open into the face of a demon. He went for her throat with both hands. It took 2 grown men to pull the child off the old woman, and the boy fought them the entire time, screaming that they were letting the monster live. A woman cradled what she believed was her infant. She rocked it. She sang to it. It was a rolled-up bundle of bedsheets. Her real children stood beside her, untouched, Watching their mother love a pile of laundry, the town's 2 doctors were overwhelmed within hours. They sent for help from neighbouring towns. They sent for help from the city of Marseille. They sent for straitjackets, and still the calls came in. House after house after house. By dawn on the 17th, the authorities made a decision. The most violent cases could no longer be kept at home. They began moving people out. The accounts describe carts and ambulances carrying the worst afflicted to asylums in the surrounding region, some to a psychiatric hospital in the nearby city, men and women bound in straitjackets, thrashing, some still on fire in their own minds, some still drowning. At least one of them did not survive the restraints. The records of the time describe patients strong enough in their delirium to bend the metal frames of hospital beds, patients who had to be held down by several orderlies at once, patients who, when the drugs of the era were finally administered, did not calm. They simply kept screaming, quieter. And then, the deaths. The exact number has always been disputed. The most commonly cited figures from the event are these: more than 250 people affected, dozens committed to asylums, and somewhere between 4 and 7 dead. One was an elderly man, whose heart simply gave out, in the middle of a hallucination. One was a man who, convinced he could fly, threw himself from a height, and could not. The town doctors, exhausted, began to compare notes with one another, and in those notes, a single terrible pattern emerged. Every patient, every single one, had eaten bread from the same bakery, one baker, one batch of flour. The French press gave it a name almost immediately. Le Pain Maudit, the cursed bread. Investigators descended on the bakery of Rochebriand. They traced the flour back through the supply chain, from the baker to the miller who had ground it, to the grain dealer who had supplied the miller. And there, the early official story took shape. The first explanation was ergot. Ergot is a fungus. It grows on rye and other grains, particularly in damp conditions, forming small dark spurs in the place of healthy kernels, ground into flour and baked into bread. Ergot is a poison, and not just any poison. Ergot poisoning has a name that goes back to the Middle Ages. St. Anthony's fire. For 1,000 years, entire European villages were periodically seized by it. Burning sensations in the limbs, convulsions, gangrene that blackened fingers and toes, and visions, wild, religious, terrifying visions. Some historians believe ergot outbreaks lie behind medieval reports of mass demonic possession, behind dancing plagues, behind, some have argued, the witch trials themselves, because ergot contains compounds closely related to a chemical that, in 1951, was barely known to the public, but very well known to a small number of laboratories, a compound first synthesized from ergot only 8 years earlier. In 1943, by a Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann. The compound was LSD. For decades, the official answer was ergot, a natural fungus. A tragic accident, bad weather, damp grain, a contaminated batch. Case closed. The survivors of Pont-Saint-Esprit never believed it. And here is where the file stops being a tragedy and starts being a mystery. Some scientists pointed out that the symptoms did not match ergot perfectly. Classic ergot poisoning, the medieval kind, tends to produce gangrene, blackened, dying flesh, the burning that gave St. Anthony's fire its name. But in Pont-Saint-Esprit, there was little gangrene. What there was, overwhelmingly, was the mind, the visions, the madness, the hallucinations, so vivid that people leapt from windows to escape them. That, some argued, was not the profile of mouldy bread. That was the profile of something far more deliberate. So, the explanations multiplied. A second theory blamed a chemical fungicide, a mercury or nitrogen compound, used to treat seed grain, accidentally milled into the flour. A third theory blamed the flour itself, an additive called agony, a bleaching agent used in some flour of the era and later banned for causing fits in dogs. 3 explanations: ergot, fungicide, bleach, each one official in its turn, each one quietly setting aside the one before it. And in the gap between them, over the following decades, a fourth theory began to grow. A theory whispered first by the townspeople, then by journalists, and finally, in the 21st century, by an American author with a stack of declassified documents. The theory was that Pont-Saint-Esprit had not been an accident at all. In 2009, an American investigative journalist named Hank Albarelli published a book making an extraordinary claim. Albarelli had spent years combing through declassified United States government documents, in particular, documents connected to a Cold War program run by the Central Intelligence Agency, a program devoted to mind control and chemical interrogation, a program whose name has since become infamous. MK Ultra, among the program's known interests, was a single substance. It tested obsessively in the early 1950 seconds, often on subjects who had no idea they had been dosed. That substance was LSD. Albarelli claimed to have found references buried in government files linking the events at Pont-Saint-Esprit to a covert experiment. His theory that the town had been deliberately dosed, a field test, a real-world trial of a chemical that could turn an entire population mad. In a single night, an entire town used as a laboratory. His evidence was contested fiercely. Many historians and chemists rejected the claim outright, arguing the documents did not say what he said. They said that the chemistry did not fit, that ergot, ordinary, accidental, mouldy ergot, remained the most likely answer. But here is the problem. The problem that keeps this file open. The official story had already changed 3 times before Albarelli ever opened a single folder. Ergot, fungicide, bleach, a government that has revised its own explanation 3 times, is a government that has already taught its people not to trust the fourth. And the people of Pont-Saint-Esprit had decided long ago. To the end of their lives, many of them said the same thing. We were poisoned. And someone knew. More than 70 years later, there is still no single answer that everyone accepts. The mainstream scientific consensus remains ergot, or some related contamination of the flower, an accident, a natural poison, with a 1,000-year history of driving villages temporarily insane. The conspiracy theory that a Cold War agency dosed a French town as an experiment is rejected by most serious historians as unproven, and probably unprovable. But notice what both sides agree on. They agree that on a single night in August of 1951, an entire town ate dinner and lost its mind, that mothers fought invisible snakes, that a child tried to kill his grandmother, that men leapt from windows to put out fires that were not there, that people died. They agree that the poison came through the bread, through the most ordinary thing, in the most ordinary town, the thing every family trusted, without a second thought. And they agree that the official explanation changed and changed and changed again. We may never know whether the cursed bread of Pont-Saint-Esprit was an accident of weather and fungus, or a chemical mistake in a mill, or something colder and more deliberate than anyone in that town could have imagined. But we know what they saw. We know what they did. We know what they could never quite be told, in plain words, by anyone in authority. And that a whole town that lost a night to madness and never got a straight answer about why is exactly the kind of thing that keeps a file open, even when the file is closed. Chalkline file doesn't promise you answers. Sometimes the file is closed. Sometimes the answers in it don't agree with each other. A town of 5,000 people sat down to dinner on an August evening in 1951. By midnight, dozens of them were bound in straitjackets. Some were dead, and the rest had spent the night running from things only they could see. What we have, 70-some years later, is a town that still stands on the RHNE. A word the newspapers gave it, Le Pen Maudit, and an official cause of death that was written and crossed out and written again. If you know something the file does not, a family story passed down, a grandparent who lived in that town, a document the rest of us have never seen. Every detail still matters, even now, even 70 years late. Cold cases stay cold until they don't. This was the cursed bread. Subscribe for more case files from the Deep Archive. Some of them have answers. Most of them are still waiting.